We're very grateful that everyone decided to come and support our work today. Our writing is to support the total liberation of African people, both in this country as well as internationally. My name is Marsha Coleman-Adebayo, and I'm one of the writers and columnists for Black Agenda Report. And I'm joined by my comrades, my colleagues here today. And you're going to get a small taste of the kind of work we do for Black Agenda Report. It's been interesting. This has been a very interesting year, has it not? Although President Obama was unable to find Ferguson or Long Island, he finally did arrive in Flint, Michigan about a year or so after people had been poisoned. He pretended to jug down some poisoned water or bottled water from Flint with a little grin on his face, if you notice, because he knew he wasn't really swallowing poisoned water. It was probably from Washington, D.C. But the residents in Flint didn't find that particularly interesting, and neither did we at Black Agenda Reports. So this year we presented a number of topics, such as down with the duopoly, the Republicans have split, now it's the Democrats' turn. If white people love drugs so much, why are the prisons full of black people? Transgender rights, but no rights for black people. We have poems every week by Raymond Turner. And the crisis this time, U.S. capitalism continues to decline with no end in sight. So let's begin. We have a special treat today because our colleague, Bruce Dixon, who was not able to join us today, is going to join us by Skype. So we're going to start with Bruce. Hello, Bruce. Can't hear.
Can't hear.
We're going to talk up because we don't have a mic in here.
If we turn the fan off, we would just all
can we turn the fan off?
We have to. Yes, it's a little bit better.
There's no.
Can't hear.
There's a remote. Bruce, hold up, hold up.
Oh, Bruce. Yeah, that's just the electricity.
I don't know.
Thank you. Why don't we start with Margaret Kimberly while they work this out?
Okay.
We'll come back to you.
So Margaret Kimberly has been, Bruce will come back to you in a few minutes, okay? Okay, good, thanks. Margaret Kimberly has been an editor and senior columnist at the bar since its inception in 2006. She's also a member of the Administrative Committee of the United National Anti-War Coalition. She also has articles appearing in publications such as Counterpunch. She's writing a book on presidential history and racism. Our colleague, Margaret.
Thank you. Thank you, Marsha. Thank you, everyone. Good afternoon. So here we are, May 2016. Only 8 more months to go. 8 months till what? 8 more months and Barack Obama will no longer be president of the United States. And I used to think that his exit from the White House would bring on a new era for black people, when we recaptured our history of activism and our history of left politics. And I hoped it would awaken people from their self-induced coma that they've been in for the past 7 or 8 years. But instead, I'm actually dreading the next 8 months, I have to say, because we cannot talk about black politics of any kind without talking about the pernicious influence of Barack Obama. He's indelibly shaped the way black people relate to politics and to activism and to our once proud history. And I'm not as happy as I anticipated, because I've come to realize that there won't be a clean break just because he heads off into the sunset. For one thing, a lot of people still love him. And he's become the drug of choice, and it'll be like withdrawal pains from nicotine or alcohol or anything else. And that process will complicate our efforts to remobilize black people into recapturing their activism. And in addition to this, there is the added damage of propaganda, endless propaganda from the White House and from their friends in the corporate media. The Obama teams, their marketing abilities are amazing. They're a big part of the reason that he became president in the first place. Everywhere we look, we see media being used to convince us that Obama is, if not the greatest, one of the greatest presidents of all. Then there's these tugs at the heartstrings with the hashtags Obama and kids. And I looked at it, and the montage was really brilliant. Brilliant, but in an evil kind of way. And so there's more of that to come between now and January. And there are two reasons this is happening. One is to silence us while he's still in office, in case anybody dares start thinking independently. Just a reminder of how much you loved him, how wonderful he is. And also to, you know, the usual thing. Well, the right wing, they still hate him. The racists still hate him. People on the Fox News website talked about his daughter or whatever. These are things you shouldn't care about, by the way. And revelation of things like that, it's another hammer in the propaganda toolbox, meant to keep us in a state of confusion and silence. So at first I sneered about these, you know, this endless mourning that, you know, we haven't gotten to January yet, as King Rat Al Sharpton pointed out. And there's a sign of something you should ignore. What will we do when we don't see Obama stepping off Air Force One? I guess what we did before January 2009. But anyway, and little kids crying because he's not going to be president and so on and so forth. But I'm worried, because it's like, what is it, you get shingles years after you had chicken pox? I think that's what it's going to be like. But while the task will be difficult, there is something simple for us to keep in mind, and that's to keep doing what we all do now. Anyone on this panel, anybody sitting here, is here because we are committed to radical change, to seeing that happen. And that means looking back and also looking forward. And we have to remember this history we had for ever since we African people were first brought here, that history of resistance and of fighting back. And 50 years ago, we consider this the halcyon days of civil rights, the battle against Jim Crow, where people had a more clear-cut enemy than we have now. And that's before the mass confusion created by the end of that movement, which was crushed. Let's not act like it just sort of, you know, ended on its own. And the love of the black face in the high place, which is also a legacy of that era, which culminated in this Obama disaster. But we can still learn a lot from the past. There's no reason why we can't resurrect those aspects of the freedom movement of the 1960s. If you could get 1 million people in one place in the days of rotary phones and snail mail and whatever else, we certainly should be able to replicate that today. But first we have to figure out what it is that we should be demanding and teaching, and how we ought to go about doing that. And I don't think it's necessary or even useful to tell people that they shouldn't have liked Obama. Nobody likes to think of themselves as having been a chump, even if they know that in their heart. But so I think we can just be very basic and start with the issues that black people are facing on a daily basis that impact our ability to survive. And I think we can start with the police. That is an issue that has already galvanized and mobilized people the last couple of years. And as everybody knows, or ought to know by now, thanks to the Malcolm X grassroots movement, that a black person is killed by police or vigilantes every 28 hours. And that became part of the lexicon, and that's something to remember. Most people haven't heard of Malcolm X grassroots movement. Everybody talks about Black Lives Matter. But this group of people who are known only to a few, they gave us the language, some of the language we need as we move on and mobilize our new activism. And thanks to them, even the corporate media have taken it on. The Guardian newspaper, they now have a project, The Counted, where, and thank goodness, because the FBI can't tell, they don't know how many people are killed by the police, they can't figure it out. So, but thank God they figured out last year 1,100 people around the country killed by the police. So now it's more difficult to sweep this under the rug. But here, let's just talk about here in New York City. I believe we can stay close to home in talking about activism. Recently, and I'm going to talk about one recent case that we had here in New York. And it's the intersection of police violence and the worship of the black face in the high place. And the particular black person in the high place is the district attorney of Brooklyn. His name is Ken Thompson. A black person, putatively anyway. But anyway, about a year and a half ago, a black man named Akai Gurley lived in the pink housing projects in Brooklyn, and he decided to walk down the steps instead of to wait for an elevator, he and his girlfriend. And it's a kind of random act that leads black people to be killed. They're policed constantly. We are over-policed. And one of the places we are is in public housing. So this man just wants to walk down the steps, opens the door, a cop named Peter Liang shoots him and kills him. He falls down the step. Liang and his partner try to cover their tracks, don't even give him mouth-to-mouth, try to give him first aid. His poor girlfriend, who's seen him shot to death, is left to do that. So he is indicted. He was convicted of manslaughter, but the black district attorney decided that he shouldn't go to jail. He said he didn't want vengeance, and it was an error. He fired the gun at the wall, and it ricocheted and hit Akai Gurley. So there's been a lot of anger, obviously, over this decision not to imprison this man, even though he was found guilty in a court of law. And I have to say, there's only one black elected official in New York, of all the city council members, state legislators, and Congress members. Charles Barron is the only one who was with the Gurley family the day the judge told them that the killer was not going to go to jail. People reacted. There was another hashtag, and it's a very simple one. It's Buy Ken. And there are people who are working to make it known that they will not stand for this. They have protested. They went to Ken Thompson's house, which I think was a good and righteous thing to do. And of course, the DA didn't like that and said, what about the sanctity of his home? Well, who cares about the sanctity of his home? Akai Gurley didn't have a sanctity to his home. He was shot in his home for doing nothing whatsoever. And we can see who the system wants us to leave alone. So yesterday, the New York Times had a whole op-ed about Ken Thompson. And people are misguided, and he's done a lot of good, and everybody should leave him alone. And that's the first sign of someone we should be agitating against. And there are other people we have not heard of. There's a group called the Copwatch Patrol Unit, and they do just what they say. They go throughout the city into public housing developments and other places, and they video the police, which is a very risky thing to do. Yesterday, a cop pulled a gun on someone. The cops were beating this man, and somebody tried to film it, and the cop pulled a gun. So that's very dangerous. The housing authority projects have become the nexus for another act of terror, and that is these gang raids. Young people are swept up, 100, 200 young people at a time, using the RICO statute, the Department of Homeland Security, ICE deportations. And these young people there may be one person they're searching for, but they sweep hundreds of kids up at one time. Some of whom are guilty of just going on Facebook and posting that somebody is their friend or giving a so-called gang sign. And this morning I read that happened yesterday in Chicago. But there are people, Copwatch unit and others, who are the vanguard of the movement. And we need to choose who the vanguard is and are. You know, Black Lives Matter have become famous around the world, but I have to say, without a lot to show. Their name is ubiquitous, so much so that any black person protesting anything is said to be a Black Lives Matter member, whether they are or not. Nobody has an event without saying, is Black Lives Matter invited, you know, which isn't bad. But there are people doing things on the ground. Like there's a group now buying Metro cards. They're swiping people into the subway. There are people who get arrested. They're too poor to afford a Metro card. They get arrested. They can go to jail. Ken Thompson, a young man, is about to go to jail for a year. The same man we're supposed to stop criticizing because we're misguided. So that all brings us back to Obama. And recently, this is college graduation season. He usually gives commencement speeches telling black people how horrible we are. And this year he's changed a little bit. Now he's just telling us not to protest, not to be confrontational, to compromise, to talk to people. And that's a sign of something that we should not be doing. The fact that he says it, and the fact that the New York Times tells us we shouldn't. So that is, I know I'm talking a little longer than I planned to, so I'll just wrap it up there and say that, you know, the radical tradition is something that we've had for hundreds of years. We have a lot of history to look back on, and we must look at ourselves. We must choose the people we have to follow who will guide us into the activism that we can recapture. Thank you very much.
Okay, our next speaker is Jemina Pierre. She's an associate professor of African American Studies and Anthropology at UCLA and a regular editor contributor at Buraka.
It's good to be here. In the past few years, we've witnessed a cascading set of tragic events affecting black people in Africa, the U.S., South America, worldwide. The Garissa attacks in Kenya that claimed the lives of 147 young students, the ongoing slaughter of Nigerians by Boko Haram, the sudden Ebola epidemic that ravaged Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Guinea, killing 11,193 people, including a large number of African doctors and healthcare workers, the virulent ethnic cleansing of black Libyans, casualties of both NATO's and Obama's administration's cynical appropriation of the momentum of the Arab Spring, and the ongoing anti-black racism in Northern Africa. The deaths of over hundreds of would-be African migrants off the coast of Libya added to the thousands of lives lost in the Mediterranean Sea, victims of imperial destabilization of Northern Africa and on the African continent. In all of this, however, the world's general response, with but few exceptions, reminds us that there is a normalization of African death and suffering. Consider the disparate global response to the killing of 12 Charlie Hebdo terrorists to that of the 147 Kenyan students, or the silence around the fact that the cholera epidemic brought by the UN forces that have been militarily occupying the Republic of Haiti since 2004. This epidemic has killed more than 9,000 Haitians and sickened more than 700,000. Or the blatant racial bias in the treatment of Africans and non-Africans infected with the Ebola virus. Even as infected non-Africans were given experimental drugs and flown to the US or Europe, while Africans, including African doctors and aid workers, were left to die from the disease. There seems to be, however, an inability or refusal to make the connections between these events of crisis or to link the general responses to them. To make these connections would be to acknowledge that in the general scheme of things, black lives, African lives don't matter. It would be to take stock of the global reality of the precarity of black existence, to link the ongoing trauma of Lampedusa, which is in Italy, the tragedy, for example, to that of the more than 250,000 Dominicans denationalized by the Dominican Republic because they're black, and to the anti-black state terror, vigilante violence across Europe, the Middle East, and the Americas. It would also be to make connections between the genocidal anti-black brown actions in the US and Brazilian police, and between the calls by Black South African students that Rhodes must fall, and by the movement in the U.S. against commemorations of the Confederacy. These events are not isolated, of course. There are consequences of a linked set of processes: colonialism, dispossession, enslavement, genocide, as well as the various movements of resistance that impact Black life all over the world. Forging a radical and principled Black movement of the 21st century begins here. A global movement for Black emancipation that explicitly and continuously links struggles. For example, the Jim Crow racism in the U.S. and European imperialism abroad. This is not a new proposition. There was a time when many Black leftists in the U.S. For many Black leftists in the U.S., Black liberation could only be imagined for radical anti-imperialism and anti-capitalism. This was a time when discussions of U.S. racism occurred alongside that of neocolonialism and were set within a broader understanding of the global system of empire and racial capitalism that exploit and appropriate land, labor, and bodies of Black people scattered across the world. The Council of African Affairs, for example, which included Paul Robeson, insisted, quote, "Our fight for Negro rights in the U.S. is inseparably linked with the liberation movements of the people of the Caribbean and Africa and the colonial world in general," end quote. And to be sure, this tradition continues among a small persistent group of folks. But shifts in global and national politics have left us with, on the one hand, this group, those who continue the broad critique of colonialism and imperialism, and by insisting that diaspora Blacks, Africans, and all colonized people share an ongoing common history of oppression and resistance, and on the other hand, those who, both purposely and unwittingly, have embraced the language and framing of U.S. nationalist and imperialist imaginings, and are only concerned, it seems, with the domestic conditions, right, certain domestic conditions of U.S. Blacks. The second trend, which is this trend where we've forgotten our anti-imperialist and anti-colonial fights, began at the height of the Civil Rights Movement, but as Barr has consistently demonstrated, the Barack Obama presidency has proven to be a watershed for dismantling this radical Black politics. Specifically, the presence of Obama in the White House has had a devastating impact on U.S. Black critique of U.S. imperialism. To paraphrase Glen, Barack Obama is the Black world's Achilles heel. In the U.S., it has met a nadir in Black politics and an ability to speak truth to power, and while he has wrought incalculable devastation in the rest of the Black world, especially on the African continent through the destruction of Libya and unprecedented militarization and control of the continent's resources, Obama's position as a Black head of empire continues to give him unprecedented loyalty. Indeed, only he is able to scold Africans to stop whining about colonialism while insisting that practices of corruption are uniquely African. Yet Obama is only at the top of a long line of Black misleaders, both within the U.S. and in the service of empire abroad. In Haiti, the military occupation, which was established by the UN, is currently being led by a Black Trinidadian diplomat, Sandra Honoré. On the African continent, after its concerted assassinations and depositions of radical leaders, the West continues to create and buttress neo-colonial puppets, with examples being Western darlings such as Paul Kagame or Ellen Sirleaf Johnson in Liberia. There is much more to be said about our current crisis, a crisis of the left more generally, and more specifically, a crisis of the Black radical left, or the Black left, not Black radical. And of course, it is a crisis that Barr has been at the forefront in analyzing. As part of this effort, I have taken as my task making the global connections of Black struggle, to link these struggles by the continuous call to recognize the long historical processes that established our current unnatural world order of white supremacist capitalism. But doing so demands clear recognition that white supremacy depends also on Black foot soldiers, and a call to break ranks, a breaking of ranks to fight against those Blacks worldwide who continue to work to uphold white supremacy. This means a move away from facile liberal identity politics that has tended to privilege individual access to halls of power, even as the masses struggle for global Black liberation. It means rage against Obama's domestic policies and his deadly ones abroad, in Haiti, Somalia, Libya, Yemen, etc. It also means as well rage and rebellion against Black liberals and Black academics, embarrassingly more concerned with music videos than their tax-funded drone bombs. most importantly, it is tapping into the power of the emerging resistance and Black liberation movements inside and outside of the U.S. From the Rose Must Fall activism in South Africa to the Nukap Obey, We Won't Obey fight in Haiti against ongoing U.S. meddling in the political process. The unique and enduring conceptions of freedom produced by these global Black struggles to imagine and create a new society must be acknowledged and understood as central to the larger questions of human freedom. Forging the radical Black and principled movement for the 21st century begins with the projection of a new order of things. Let it be the promise of our Black lives mattering globally.
Danny is a writer and activist from the Boston area. He's contributed to Black Agenda Report since 2013, and his work has appeared in independent media such as Truth Out, Counterpunch, and the American Herald Tribune. He's of Vietnamese descent and became a Marxist through the teachings of Ho Chi Minh and Huey P. Newton. Danny.
So, I just want to begin by wishing a belated birthday, Max, Yuri Pochiyama, and Ho Chi Minh. And Lorraine Hansberry, who I don't know as well, but she has to be in there too. So all of them have been influential in my own political development, but more importantly, the political development of millions of oppressed people seeking liberation all over the world. Second, I'm honored to be sharing my first time at the Left Forum with Black Agenda Report. So Black Agenda Report has been an anchor for me in this period of deep crisis within the fabric of U.S. capitalist empire. Black Agenda Report is a leader in left political thought in a period where principled left forces in the United States are few and far between. So there is no better vehicle to have a discussion on the subject of building a principled Black movement than with the architects of BAR. Now, I am not Black and don't assume authority over the Black political movement. However, as a member of the working class and subject of this racist capitalist society, there are few things to me that are more important than solidarity. Solidarity brings class unity, and class unity can only be achieved on the basis of principles. Principles lay the foundation for action and guidance as to just what it will take to defeat the U.S. capitalist empire at the root of all of our problems. What I have learned from BAR is that we must call a spade and be unafraid to do so. Black Agenda Report has never wavered in this regard. So Marxists like myself, we like to pay special attention to contradictions. Contradictions are the motive force of society. The struggle between opposites is what transforms the old into the new and determines the historical conditions of a given moment. For my presentation, I want to discuss the gravest and most important contradiction today, for it will determine what a principled movement must ultimately confront in this difficult juncture of history. That contradiction is between the crisis of U.S. capitalist empire and the ideological lag that the entire left in the United States is currently experiencing. What I mean by this is that the crisis of U.S. empire has created ripe conditions for a revolutionary movement, yet no such movement exists. It is worth reviewing the relationship between the empire's crisis and the subjective consciousness of the left. Beginning around the early 1970s, the rulers of U.S. capitalist empires apparatus found their system on the path toward endless decline and crisis. After becoming the world's capitalist superpower after World War II, the U.S. economy's prosperity turned into its opposite. Technological advancements began to permanently replace human labor power and thus replace capitalism's primary source of profit. The lords of capital kept getting richer through improved productivity, but the entire system even more costly to operate. The product of this has been nearly 4 decades of deindustrialization and financialization, war, and the universalization of counter-revolution that was once reserved for communist and revolutionary movements of years prior. For the masses, especially the Black working class, the impact of jobless recoveries, growing poverty rates, and the development of the largest and most racially repressive state apparatus known to humanity has been great. The U.S. capitalist system not only owns the most military bases in the world, but also the most prisoners, half of whom are black. It is home to the largest surveillance apparatus on the planet. Developments such as mass incarceration and surveillance emerged as both products of the counter-revolutionary insurgency against the Black liberation movement of 40 years ago and the heroic struggle for socialist revolution around the world throughout the 20th century. The U.S. capitalist economy has reached a dead end, and this has made the expansion of these counter-revolutionary measures all the more necessary. A turning point in the empire's decline was the ascendancy of Barack Obama. His presidency has been the quintessential example of what the contradiction between the crisis of empire and the ideological lag in the movement looks like in this period, and just what forces are to blame. Barack Obama was elected in 2008 and again in 2012 to rescue the empire from itself. He ended up being wildly successful in neutralizing radical thought and action through the politics of lesser evilism and black class collaboration. Never before had the entire system of imperialism been represented by a supposed member of those it enslaved and colonized to build its very foundation. His mere presence silenced many and gave the empire a momentary breath from left resistance. This allowed the Obama administration to intensify imperialism's program of counter-revolution. Black Agenda Report rightfully labeled Obama from the very beginning the most effective evil imperialism we think of. Thousands of people marched against Bush's wars, and anger from the 2008 capitalist crash cemented the Republican Party's boogeyman identity. Yet in every area of policy, foreign to domestic, the Obama administration only escalated and added on to Bush-era policies. Entire cities, such as Black Detroit, were handed to the banks for so-called emergency management. Massive public school closings, teacher layoffs, and charter school investments characterize Obama's race to the top education policy. Poverty rose in every year of his administration, and black wealth is below what it was in the 1960s. Obama gave the military state a boost by overthrowing Libya, escalating the war on Syria, and expanding AFRICOM throughout the African continent. He's killed thousands by his own decree with a personal kill list and a quick-trigger drone program in the Middle East and North Africa. And this just skims the surface of the austerity, war, and impoverishment that the Obama administration has wrought on the working class and poor throughout the planet. In the year of Obama's departure, much has changed. A movement against police terrorism emerged in 2015 following the murder of Michael Brown. What has been called the Black Lives Matter movement has shown a spotlight on the extrajudicial police lynching of black people. In rapid fashion, efforts such as the Black Radical Tradition Conference earlier this year in Philadelphia indicated that a renewed debate and struggle over the direction of the Black liberation movement was in birth. This can only excite someone like myself, who sees the Black liberation movement as a driving force of a socialist future in the United States. The 2016 elections have, in turn, tapped into the energy of the Occupy movement and put inequality back into the political discourse. The Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump campaigns have sparked an internal revolt within the two corporate parties. This revolt has the potential to split the Republican Party and begin a similar process in the Democratic one. Bernie Sanders has excited thousands of progressive-leaning people, especially young people, by raising issues such as poverty, healthcare, and education that have been thoroughly repressed by both corporate parties over the last 8 years. However, the internal revolt has inherited difficult conditions. An independent movement does not exist to provide organization, discipline, and guidance to its ranks. It is up to a principled left movement to articulate the character of these conditions and organize to fight back against them. The elections simply won't do this. Washington is the house that capitalism and racism built, and no candidate can change it from the inside. The task from here is to engage those who have been propelled into action by the crisis of U.S. empire, whether we are talking about what Glen calls the Sandinistas or Black Lives Matter activists. How we engage these forces is what matters. Our first commitment is always to the truth. But the truth isn't always embraced right away, especially given how massive the misleadership apparatus is here in the United States. A movement for social transformation in the 21st century, thus, will be in part a battle of ideas and a war over truth. The targets of this war will be many. The U.S. media is owned by 6 monopoly corporations. The black political class, the labor aristocracy, and their Democratic Party masters remain in firm grip over the political direction of the oppressed. NGOs and nonprofits have only further complicated the situation. These forces of misdirection must be confronted, or they will continue to wreak havoc on the collective consciousness of oppressed people. I have been asked many times why I write the Black Agenda Report. The answer will always be the same. Black Agenda Report reflects the radical and revolutionary consciousness that must inform and guide our movement. Our movement must fight for self-determination, whether we are talking about black people in America or Syrian people in Syria. It must fight on a class basis and call out not just the racist bigots of our eras, such as Donald Trump, but also those who create the conditions that allow them to fester and thrive, such as Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. The Democratic and Republican parties must be held equally responsible for the crimes of capitalism and imperialism. That means our movement must oppose the rule of capital, private property, and profit altogether. Black Agenda Report consistently gives voice to the urgent need for such a movement. Now it is our responsibility to build it in the flesh.
Thank you very much. Okay, so our next speaker is Buraka. He's a contributor to Black Agenda Report, Black Left Unity Network, leadership of Global Coalition of the UN Decade of People of African Descent.
Yes.
So that you
Oh, no, you can come here.
It's a good thing we're flexible here. Technological challenges.
No, I want to take a picture.
Thank you, and thank all of you for being here this afternoon. I'm going to keep my comments relatively brief so we get to the other speakers and hopefully have a few minutes for some conversation. You know, the way I see it in terms of the challenge for building a new black left and for building a new revolutionary movement, it's quite complex, but I'm going to just touch on 3 main challenges. First, outside of the noise of the current electoral process, we know there's going to be the continuation of certain tendencies, okay, certain trends, if you will. First, we know that basically, no matter who becomes the new occupant of the White House, there's going to be the continuation of the contradictory internal logic of neoliberal capitalism. Okay, that's going to continue. We know that. We know that there's going to be an intensification on the assault on working people, and in particular, the negative impact that's going to have, or continue to have, or will intensify in terms of the plight of the black working class. We know that at this stage in the neoliberal process, that entire segments of the population have become redundant, superfluous. But we know that the biggest segment of that population happens to be African Americans or black workers. Okay? Those tendencies, those trends will continue no matter who's in the White House at this point. The second challenge, we know there's going to be a continuation of international gangsterism in the form of war. We've seen the insane rampage by U.S. imperialism through the entire so-called Middle East over the last decade or so. That's going to continue, unfortunately, until there's a counterforce to that. We've seen the psychotic movement on the part of NATO in Europe, now moving troops right up to the border of Russia. We saw the crazy activity in Ukraine with the subversion of that state. We have seen the green light given to all kinds of repression and death and destruction being carried out by vassal states like the Saudis in Yemen. We saw what happened in Egypt with the short-circuiting of that revolutionary process by imperialism, and we saw the slaughter of thousands of people, and the U.S. state unable to even claim or to characterize that what it was, which was in fact a coup. And so we see that this is going to continue, because the third thing that we know is going to continue is continued repression. That basically, because of the relative decline of the U.S. economic situation, it now relies more and more on repression and on war. And therefore, repression will continue in this country. We know that, and we can see through practice, that democracy and international law has now become an impediment to U.S. hegemony. And therefore, it is systematically being marginalized. That will continue. That leads me to what we need. How do we counter these tendencies, these trends? Well, I think Danny and others have already talked about the fact for the continued ideological struggle. We've got to continue to delegitimize what is being projected and accepted as normal politics. That the conditioning that has resulted in large majorities of the American people accepting war. The acceptance of large majorities that austerity is inevitable. We've got to continue to engage in the de-legitimization of that kind of worldview. So the ideological struggle, the intellectual agitation, if you will, is absolutely paramount. It's paramount because we've got to really begin to radicalize this population here in North America. I mean, that's something we have to do, because we're not just talking about the plight of black people or the plight of the working class in the U.S., but we're talking about the plight of humanity because of the central role that this empire plays globally. So we've got to continue that process of stripping away the illusions, if you will, really. Radicalizing people, building radical consciousness. We've got to rehabilitate and bring back into the center of discourse the notion of class. We can't play with class any longer, okay? We can't be afraid to use the terms. You know, we know and we understand intersectionality is fundamental for that to be a part of our framework. But often the intersectional discourse tends to obscure or undermine the focus on class. You know, we have multiple identities, but what determines how we experience reality, how we experience day-to-day living is often, and primarily in my opinion, informed by our class positions. Okay? We got to bring that back into the discourse. We've got to be committed to building new institutions. We've got to be committed to building dual power. If we are committed strategically to the notion of electoral politics, that's fine, as long as it's clear that the electoral process is a process that is geared towards strategically building alternative power. It's not about just candidate-centered politics. It has to be us making sober, objective assessments on where we can enter into the electoral process, bourgeois politics, strategically, in order to strengthen our alternative structures, okay? I'm not one of those folks who take a purist position that says that basically any participation in bourgeois democracy is automatically corrupting. It's corrupting if you allow it, if you're not clear about what you're doing strategically. So no, we've got to have a liberation of theory, if you will, in order to engage in more creative practice. We have to struggle for more effective national coordinating structures among the left. We know that unity is a struggle, and we've got to continue to engage in that struggle, which means we've got to continue to engage in respectful but sharp and honest conversation, struggle among ourselves. Finally, we have to, as Emma Carter-Brown talked about, we've got to return to the source. We've got to return to the source, which is the people. We've got to rehabilitate the notion that basically we're not going to defeat imperialism by shouting at it. We're not going to be able to undermine the internal logic of capital by just being upset. We've got to organize ourselves and build alternative movements. We've got to engage in base building activity, organizing again. We have to have effective democratic grassroots organizations and democratic intellectual and political engagement. We've got to rehabilitate internationalism, and in particular anti-imperialism. We have allowed for the infiltration of liberalism ideologically to undermine our ability to take clear anti-imperialist positions. All of us are concerned about authoritarianism, okay? But there's also the idea that national states have a right to sovereignty, that movements have to be driven by internal processes, and that when we see that certain states are in the crosshairs of imperialism, it's a strange thing to align yourself with imperialism because you're concerned about authoritarianism in a particular state. That's something we haven't really done before, you know, in a massive way here in this country. Well, basically, we have people who call themselves leftists or revolutionaries who align themselves with U.S. imperialism, be it in Libya or Syria or whatever. It's absolutely mind-boggling. And it's done with such moral superiority, you know? We've got to deal with that and defeat that directly. So, you know, these are some of the tasks that we have, some of the needs that we have in terms of building a movement. And like many of our speakers this morning, I'm really happy to be a part of this bar process. As I tell people, if you're serious about revolutionary change in the U.S., if you're serious about having a clear-eyed analysis of geopolitical realities and struggles, if you're not reading Bar, then what the hell are you reading? You know? So I will end my comments at this point.
Something again, Bruce.
There you go. You call that stretching it, so we get it. So now we have Bruce, who's one of the founders of this incredible instrument. I will end my comments at this moment. Thank you.
I don't think I can say it any better than you did. Bruce Dixon, I don't think you really need an introduction. We all know who you are. Can you hear me?
Oh no! No.
Can he say something?
You need to talk into the computer, not to the screen.
Bruce, do you hear us?
I can, but I couldn't make out what was being said there.
Your intro.
It was an intro.
Oh, that was the intro. Oh, well. All right.
I had
We are
introduced
ready
you earlier.
and waiting to hear your comment. You're on board.
All right, here we are. Hey,
Can you see him
thank you
first? I'm
for
sitting here.
indulging me electronically this way. I apologize for not being there in New York to meet and greet each one of you personally. Especially Dan, who I don't think I've ever met in person yet. We've talked on the phone and on the internet a number of times, but I've never met him in person. And of course, all of you who came to hear and see us today at the Left Forum. Towards a radical and principled black movement in the 21st century, hey, what's radical and what's principled? Well, what's radical is fighting for actual power, fighting for control over the food systems, the electricity, the communications, how we're policed, where we're even allowed to live in the city. Principle? What principles does a black movement have to have in the 21st century? Do we think it has to have in the 21st century? These are the questions that we're supposed to be exploring here. I got a few thoughts on that. Really, what would a radical and principled black movement in the 21st century look like? Who would lead it? Who would fund it? How would such a movement, what would such a movement be fighting for or against? And again, how would it be funded? We've got to ask a lot of hard questions in order to get where we want to go on this. And the place to start, probably, when you want to go somewhere that you've never gone, when you want to build something that you've never built before, one useful place to start is with what you don't want, with the things you have that you don't want, or the condition that you have that you don't want. And what parts of that condition do you want to get rid of? Well, there are definitely a few things that we can see that a radical and principled black movement for the 21st century is going to have to throw out the window. One of them would be, perhaps the first one, would be the nonprofit ethos. For a long time, the way to do good, quote unquote, is to start a nonprofit organization. That's what college grads and sensible people have been telling themselves for more than a generation, perhaps almost 2 generations now. Start a nonprofit. Well, we've seen where that led. We now have a vast, vast nonprofit industry, which is giving birth to a sort of fake protest industry. We've got large nonprofits who are supposed to be the spokespeople or the spokes organizations for this and that causes, but these organizations are not funded by their members. They're funded by corporations. They're not led by their members. They're led by self-selected groups or groups that are selected by the funders, by the corporate funders. And it's just become not a model that is going to lead to change. As a matter of fact, Barack Obama came directly out of that sector. Remember, Barack Obama was the first president who used to be a community organizer. Okay? Is that right?
Right.
So he came from the nonprofit sector. So if people imagine that we're really going to get a relief from where we are, that we're really going to change things on the corporate dime, well, you know, you might get a career that way, but you're really not going to make power change. You're really not going to change power that way. Again, nonprofits have given us a whole industry of fake protest and a whole set of customs that we now adhere to without even caring where they came from. Another thing we're going to have to throw out is this old shibboleth that we hear in the black community about black unity. Black unity is killing us, quite frankly. I can remember 8 years ago being at, what was it, the Social Forum, 7 years ago, being at the Social Forum in Detroit, and talking to a gentleman from Brooklyn, an African-American gentleman from Brooklyn, an activist of some kind, And and I asked him why he was backing Barack Obama. And he said, well, he said that the reason we're backing Barack Obama is because all the barriers to advancement by people of our race must fall. All the barriers must fall. And that was his reason. You know, that was the reason. I tried to reason with him and said, you mean all the barriers against having the first black president that bombs black and brown babies in Somalia, Pakistan? I tried, but it had no effect because, of course, Barack was the first. And these are another thing that we've got to look at with this tradition of black unity is where did it come from? The tradition of black unity is really ostensible class blind unity behind an elite class of black people who were supposed to lead us in the struggle. We all remember hearing the story about how there were many other people in Montgomery, Alabama, who refused to sit down on those buses, who refused to stand up and go back to the back of the buses also. But they were not as respectable as Rosa Parks was. You know, so this is what we're looking at when we look at leadership that is class leadership itself. I mean, everything has a class aspect to it, even racial politics, especially racial politics, and especially when it disavows class. There's a class component to that too. So another thing that we've got to throw out is our reluctance to call ourselves socialists and our reluctance to oppose capitalism as such. I mean, racism is racism. And of course, I'm not going to go back over the old argument about whether capitalism gave birth to white racism and white supremacy. I think there's some people who, for whatever reasons, think it didn't. But I got to tell you, we're looking at gentrification all over the country here. Does racism explain, perhaps racism can explain one instance of gentrification, but racism certainly can't explain all of it. Racism can't explain why gentrification in Atlanta and Chicago, I'd say more in Atlanta though, is pushing out poor black people and making room for wealthier people who are mostly white, but a good number of them are black as well. Racism doesn't explain why black banks, black-owned banks, community-owned banks, not community-owned, but black-owned banks are in Brooklyn and in Chicago and in Atlanta and other places are partners in gentrification projects. You know, the only explanation for gentrification is the fact that we've already seen the engineering of the social system in which African Americans are near the bottom of the economic pile, and under capitalism, a stable working class neighborhood has no value, except the value that can be realized by flipping and driving out its inhabitants and rebuilding the place and refitting the place for a wealthier clientele. That's capitalism. That's capitalism. And if we're going to want to fight racism and white supremacy, getting rid of capitalism gives us the invaluable ground, the indispensable ground to stand on to do that. And without that, we're not going to do it. I was at a conference in January in Philadelphia that was put on by Mother Anthony Montero and a wonderful group of people in that city. And one of the things that one of the presenters from St. Louis, oh my God, Jemina Rogers asked the question. She said, we've got a 74-year-old white Jewish senator claiming that he's a socialist. What are we afraid of? What are we afraid of? You know, black activists don't call themselves socialists and don't question the capitalist system. So, and if we don't do these things, we're not in shape to fight for power. This is the ground we have to work on. Let me go back to my notes here. What can I miss? Oh yes. And the last thing that I'm going to say about radical, principled black movement for the 21st century is who's going to lead it, who's going to pay its bills. Right now, where did all of our black leaders come from? All of them were chosen by the media. And the media is owned by corporate billionaires. All of them were chosen by Hollywood. All of them were chosen by what? Or in the case of Raymond, some of them were chosen by, I don't know, by Twitter. So, by social media. So, where will the leadership of the radical and principled black movement come from? The answer is it's going to have to be a leadership that is directly responsible to a defined membership. How many of these organizations actually collect dues? How many of these organizations actually have functioning members and defined members as people paying dues? How many of these organizations are actually doing anything to make it worthwhile for a member to pay dues? Until we can construct organizations that are lively enough and principled enough and do their jobs well enough to make people want to pay dues to keep the organization going, we're not on the road to a radical and principled black movement for this or any other century. Not long ago, there was a case in court, California teacher's case, where a lot of labor unions were really upset and fearful that their right to be able to extract union dues from people in the workplace without talking to them first would be, I was looking, there were people who were saying that this is labor to the United States. My own view, and if Justice Scalia had died, that surely would have been of the Supreme Court. My own view was not.
Okay, straighten out.
Okay, I'm hearing a lot of noise.
We can hear you. Now he's back.
Yeah, I'm usually the tech guy in Black Agenda. And I'm not there in person today, so I'm going to wrap it up. The key thing with the radical and black movements of the 21st century also is they're going to have to be led from below. They're going to have internal mechanisms that can allow people at the bottom to replace their leaders in short order if that needs to be happening. And they're going to have to be financed by members, because only membership financed organizations are going to be able to stand the test. And that's it. Thank you. Oh, why you're welcome.
Thank you very much. So our next speaker is someone who really does not need introduction. Glen Ford. Yay!
Power to the people.
Power to the people. Would you like me to introduce you?
You paused and I feel the space.
No. He really doesn't need an introduction. So let's get to Glen Ford, okay? Glen, yeah.
And once again, power to the people. When you speak last, you get to see how unimportant most of what you had prepared to say really is, compared to what your colleagues have said, that is profound and meaningful. So I'm not going to talk about strategies and tactics for this movement of the 21st century. I want to talk about getting the space for this movement to exist. So my subject is going to be the question of whether we can forge this radical and principled movement for the 21st century. And that means whether we can defeat the corporate duopoly. And for black people, that means, can we defeat the Democratic Party and its hegemony in our community? That's what the duopoly means to us, because we don't have any Republican polls in that community. And this is really a fantastic election season. I'm 66 years old, and I've never seen anything like this. A period in which it really does appear, any way that I can analyze it, that this duopoly, this two-party system, both parties run by corporations, is doomed. It cannot, if they're going to continue this bourgeois democratic process, it will not be duopoly. I think that the root of the crisis is, and this is for the duopolists, the root of the crisis is capitalism's inability or refusal to honor the previous implied or perceived, people thought they had a contract with the working class. And I am talking about white workers, because black folks never thought they had a contract anyway. But white people did feel that they had some kind of understanding with the folks they worked for or wanted to work for. But the erosion of workers' standards of living over the past 3 or 4 decades, and the collapse of the financial economy in 2008, that basically broke the deal. It removed any basis for people believing that they had some kind of understanding. The people actually do. I'm talking about white people and black people. People actually do blame the monopoly system, but they don't use that word. That's a word that most people on the left don't even use. They use words like they blame politics, and they blame Congress, and they blame gridlock, or anything that they hear some CNN personality saying. But really, they're talking about the duopoly, and they're very close to an understanding of it. But that's the duopoly system that is at work. Mostly white people are rebelling against this duopoly system. And there's a reason that black people are not so directly engaged in joining those centrifugal forces that are working against the Republican and Democratic, they call them elites on CNN. The reason is that black folks within this duopoly system are caught in a double trap. The duopoly system is, of course, a trap for everybody. But for black folks, it is a double trap. Because in the United States, being a racist country, one of those two duopoly parties is always going to be the white man's party. Its main engine for gathering mass support will be white supremacy. And this has been true since before emancipation. There was always a more racist party, a whiter white man's party, whose attraction was that it was more white supremacists. And so when black folks are then segregated, of course you can't be of any use in the white man's party, so of course you're in the Democratic Party. But if your motivation to vote is to defeat the white man's party, and that is our motivation to vote. We go to the polls to defeat that white man, that really bad cracker. All right? And so that's why we remain in the Democratic Party, because being a duopoly, that's the only mechanism that can do that. But that logic then says, well, you're going to support in the primaries the strongest candidate of the inclusive party, the Democratic Party, the strongest candidate. And of course, this being a capitalist system, that means the corporate candidate. All right? You won't even support Barack Obama in 2008 until he shows in Iowa that he can get white votes and actually can compete out there and may be able to beat that white man's party. Until Barack Obama won in Iowa, the overwhelming majority of black elected officials and about half of the black public still had not come around to be supportive of him, because they were afraid that this might let the white man's party triumph again. So this is the double bind, and it creates an insane situation like the insanity that Brother Ajamu was talking about, in which black folks, who are the most left-leaning constituency in the United States, study after study has shown that we are the most redistributionist constituency, and by far the most anti-war. So we are the center of the left in terms of ethnicities in this country, and yet we find ourselves, because of this double bind, this double trap in the duopoly, we find ourselves supporting the most right-wing faction or pole of the Democratic Party. Donald Trump has worked wonders. I mean, we all hate him. He is the whitest of the white man's party. That is his job. What he has succeeded in doing is distilling the white supremacist part of the appeal. All right, the game that the Republicans have always run on racist white people down to its essence. All these, most of this Republican white constituency really cared about was the racial aspect of the party. They wanted a white man's country. They wanted not just jobs, but they wanted good jobs for white people. And there's really a difference, all right? And with the collapse, with the 30 years of erosion and then the collapse, it was quite, these folks felt that what they were entitled to, what they expected to get from this white man's party was being withheld. Where are my good white man's jobs, you see? Now they see this through the prism of race. So if you think that the left should go around poaching in that territory, you are wrong, and we will not trust you if you do. I'm talking to white folks. Poach around there and try to sanitize these people. They see it through the prism of race, and that's why they have organized themselves under the Trump banner. It's really been amazing to see how all of the accoutrement of republicanism, most of which was corporatism, just gets stripped, thrown away once Trump stripped it down to the bone. And they actually tolerate. They tolerate, didn't hurt his standing among his supporters at all when he questioned the very rationale for the U.S. militarized empire. Right. He just threw national security as the rationale, or some American mission in the world, out the window and reduced it all to a financial transaction. And his people didn't bat an eye. They never really gave a fuck about exceptionalism and all that, at least in terms of U.S. being exceptional beyond their homestead and their particular privileges in this country. And if the right wing of the right wing does not believe in all this crap, who does? I mean, it just lays the whole thing there. Where is the constituency? In the Democratic Party or the Republican Party? Where is the war party? How many people are in the war party? So these are wonderful things, and I have to thank Trump for give the devil his due, and he is due. I think the Bernie's people, and I do think that their rebellion happening within the same space as Trump's folks' rebellion has been affected by it. That they see folks butting up against their party and successfully, and that encourages them to do the same in the Democratic Party. But Bernie's people are actually a much more interesting group for us, because I pull these figures out of orifices you shouldn't see. But I believe that Trump's people represent about 30% of the white electorate, and it's pretty irreducible. No matter what you do, what he does, it stays there. They are a block. I think that Bernie's people actually represent about 30% or more of the white electorate as well. And the political space that they occupy in terms of their beliefs is the least tilled in the United States. It's the Democrats sitting on that space, you see, fooling people, but not tilling that space. There is no social democratic party. I know lots of us don't like that word because we know what folks that we respect, the scowls they had on their face when they spat out the word social democrat. But you know what I'm talking about. Something like Bernie's Swedish social democrats. And that whole part of the spectrum has been neglected. What I'm trying to say here is that these two, the Trump people need their own party, and I think that they know it, whether they get the Republican Party and keep it, or they make their own party. It's going to happen. And it will be more difficult with Bernie's people, but they will learn the same thing. One of the things that these primary elections has done, you have demographic groups of people that you can describe by various means, by their social status and political inclinations, but they're not really a social force unless they believe they are, unless they start acting as if, consciously acting as if I'm one of these, you know, not that, I'm this. And in this primary season, we have seen the Trump white supremacists form themselves into a self-conscious social force. And I think that is happening as well with the Bernie people too. Every time there's a primary, you can see your strength. You can measure yourself, and it's in opposition to someone else. And that's how social forces are built. Now, what's that mean to us? We, in terms of building this movement in the 21st century, if we do not break the hegemonic power of the Democratic Party in Black America, we're going to continue to have, we're going to continue to be quite limited. I mean, we're also happy that after Ferguson we have something that could be called an incipient movement. You know, we ain't had a black movement in 2 generations. And so we're so happy that there is something that we can call emergent occurring. But the Democratic Party damn near wrecked that. They tried to swallow that. They swallowed half of that, and they went down eagerly. You know, the Ray McKesson's crew, who were quite happy at the prospect of getting appointments and maybe even elected to office for themselves as individuals, but really wanted to turn their faction of Black Lives Matter, we use that term, into a MoveOn.org for a black one for the Democratic Party. They're eager to do that, and I don't think that the co-founders of the Black Lives Matter network were quite clear about that terrain as it transpired. I think that their decision not to endorse any political candidates, which is really saying we're not going to endorse Democrats. I think we had something to do with it at bar, because nobody likes to be named and shamed. I'm starting to name and shame them. But this Democratic Party almost swallowed that little incipient movement, and they still might. All right. So we are fighting for space within our own community. It's going to take a long time, I believe, as these white social forces that now one of them feels the burn. I don't know what the Trump people feel, but they feel it. It will take a while to wean us off of the Democratic Party in big numbers. But it is encouraging that half of the of blacks 18 to 35 are Bernie supporters. And I know that a much higher proportion of whites are Bernie supporters than that, but they don't have anything like the hegemony of the Democratic Party to contend with. The Democratic Party, not only are all our elected officials Democrats, but all of our civic organizations are annexes of the Democratic Party, and our fraternities and sororities are annexes of the Democratic Party, every institution. So if you already have half of the youngish black folks who are basically giving the finger to the top of the Democratic Party, that is really significant. Because, you know, these young white kids, they don't have to worry about there is no equivalent of the white man's party who's going to come lynch you. You see what I'm saying? These are real forces of history that lock us into this democratic scene. And even when, as I believe will happen rather soon, there is a viable, I'll call it social democratic party, and we are the quintessential social democrats. Michael Dawson, who I think is the most brilliant social demographer in the country, says that most black folks, or the biggest block of black folks, do resemble most closely Swedish social democrats. And a lot of us are way to the left of that. And he's made the study of the black spectrum his life's work. Therein is the space for our principled, radical black movement for the 21st century. It is in the struggle against the duopoly. It is in trying to figure out how, as these lefty or leftish white forces make space, how do we use it in order to have more space to fight against that hegemon who is in an unprecedented way in our midst. It's a good problem to have, and I'm very excited about it. Proud to be here.
So if you're not reading bar, what are you? So we also have at bar a resident poet who actually turns words into music. He's one of my favorite poets. Raymond, please come up and bless us with your words.
Singing against backdrops of crackling flames, so low their bass reverberated crooked teeth, drowning out shouts and shots of us no-names. The big voices all through way off key. Mint, fresh faces of Franklin, Cleveland, and Chase inspired their song with an amazing grace. Black is beautiful, but green power sounds sweeter. Not rocking the boat. Being dutiful, let us seize the hour and let us lower our note. Singing shuffling ditties as the 70s swung in, They rocked like Booker T and other soul men. Oh, so low they'd sing a simple song. The best things in life are free. So what if loving you is wrong? You can't prove that by me. They can get down like James Brown on bended knees and screaming and begging, baby, please, please, baby, please go vote. The battle's no longer in the streets. Baby, please go vote. We're fighting now for leather seats. Baby, please go vote. I know the white man done you wrong. Baby, please go vote. So vote for me and make us strong. Baby, please go vote. You suffered enough, heaven knows. Baby, please go vote. Elect me and I'll heal your woes. Baby, please go vote. I wanna be your next congressman. Baby, please go vote. I promised ban the Ku Klux Klan. Baby, please go vote. Look into all racist attacks. Baby, please go vote. From the hills, across the tracks. Baby, please go vote. So don't protest or demonstrate. Baby, please go vote. Elect me, I'll negotiate. Baby, please go vote. Promises, 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 and their makers come and go. Till we sing, we shall overthrow. Carved in marble, etched in granite, rich tapestry cut from the same cloth. Nicknames notwithstanding, their name is Legion, the father of his country, the sage of Monticello, great communicator, the great emancipator, the father of the Constitution, the trust buster, old Hickory, old rough and ready, Mr. Missouri, Bubba, Slick Willie, the little magician, Tricky Dick. But lynching Baines Johnson resonated deepest until boom, 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 boom. Jesus Christ came back. Not as an organizer of Sleepy Park orders, rejecting George. Not as a socialist, speaking truth to lunch bucket crowds in Harlem. Not as a pistol-packing terrorist, pointing her people at the North Star. Not as a bearded old white extremist, uncomfortable with slavery. Not as a Muslim minister spitting fire at mass murderers posing as victims. Not as a Baptist preacher pinning the emperor's clothes on fine lines of love. Jesus Christ came back from a manger on Madison Avenue, slinging slogans and selling snake oil labeled hope from the back of the wizard's wagon. Good Chicago shit. Lincoln, Jesse Oakman, and other orators have put fees on for hundreds of years. Jesus Christ came back. Temptation walking the Potomac. To beauty's only skin deep, yay, and calibrating his cover story. Rosa sat so Martin could stand, so the state machine could run amok with bloody precision around the planet. Jesus Christ came back, forgiving thieves and murderers, escaping Calvary with gold aboard Pontius Pilate's helicopter and old Satan's wheelchair. Came back overturning tables in the temple and throwing money changers out with trillions in dollars. Came back teaching men to fish for tarp, multiplying like loaves. Jesus Christ came back crowned Prince of Peace, though he bore billions for shepherds beating swords into stock shares. Jesus Christ came back with his eye on the sparrow and hand on the drone. Came back sending Christian soldiers spreading the gospel of empire, ensuring that the meek shall inherit the earth of mass graves he so piously blesses. Jesus Christ came back blowing smoke about clean coal and nukes while hurling his green czar under Greyhound wheels and recycling disciples from regimes past. Since a rising tide lifts all boats except those of pirates and terrorists who fish and farm when left alone. Jesus Christ came in with a jump shot, crossover, and slick behind the back ball handling skills for pimp slapping black caucus liberal labor apostles who stood on ice crying freeze-dried tears on his warhead and singing obscene songs about the bombs bursting in air and the rocket's red glare as he taunted and tamed them in tongues. Tamp down your expectations, for there are no Negroes, youngsters, or old fools too big to fail. Now, get up there and get my money. Jesus Christ came back as a professor impersonating Iceberg Slim, though his flock swore, they'd hold his feet to the fire. Is that why his combat boots have lipstick on them? Finally, chevron cauldron of Kool-Aid bubbling green, fracking fluid for dim-witted monkeys ready to fly in formation from Philly to the Pentagon. Methane clouds, ghastly skull and bones hovering like a little poison from Monsanto. Don't drink, 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 don't drink. Broomstick by Boeing, lip wax by Lockheed Martin. The Wicked Witch of the West, gold-plated Iron Lady Halliburton hustler, who in a just world would be at The Hague, standing trial. Instead, she dances on Goldman Sachs of dark money, her coven cackling. We fudged, we spun, we lied, we came, we saw, he died. We fudged, we spun, we lied, we came, we saw, he died. She covets the crimson combat boots on the commander, who should also be at The Hague. Don't drink, 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 don't drink. She strafes just like a warlord. Yes, she does. And she makes war like a warlord. She takes just like a warlord. But she fakes like a Goldwater girl. She plays dominoes with Negroes. Yes, she does. Everybody knows her deadly warrior pose. Everybody, except Negroes. Nobody here feels any pain when she splatters the baby's blood and brain. And I must spit there is a bomb in Hillary. Another killing spree. There is a bomb in Hillary. Maybe World War III. There is a bomb in Hillary. Keep up the wars going. There is a bomb in Hillary. Enriching thugs like Boeing. There is a bomb in Hillary. Women and children die. There is a bomb in Hillary. Leave the people dry. Cause she can lie like Cheney. She can kill like Callie. You wouldn't want to meet her, at midnight in the alley. There is a bomb in Hillary. Maybe World War III. There is a bomb in Hillary. Another killing spree. Yeah. There is a bomb in Hillary. Maybe World War III. There is a bomb in Hillary. Maybe World War III.
Take this opportunity to thank all of you for coming. We ask you to please continue to support Black Agenda Report with your contributions, with your kind thoughts, especially your contributions. And we will see you next year at the Left Forum. Yay!